This is November the 18th, 1976. Mary B. Roberts interviewing for the Oklahoma Historical Society and the Living Legends. Uh, Today we are at the museum, and I'm learning a great deal about military history today. Uh, the next interviewee will be, would you give us your name, please, and spell it out?
Bruce E. Rey, R-E-Y.
R-E-Y. All right. You see, this recorder doesn't spell, and so when when it's taken off into manuscript, sometimes why they get it wrong. So we always ask for it to be spelled. And any proper names that you use later on about your family, the questions I'll ask you, please spell those names. First, today we're going to record his military history, and I'm going to turn the mic over to him and let him tell it. He has an outline here, and I'm going to let him tell it as he wants to. Mr. Ray.
Well, first of all, you know there's more ways to spell the name Ray than any other name. There's about 7 different ways. Anyway, I joined the Oklahoma National Guard with the headquarters company in 1932 with the Quartermaster detachment. We, of course, made our summer camp at Fort Sill. This is back during the days when we took 2 days to drive our vehicles from Oklahoma City to Fort Sill. It took a half a day or a day to drive from here to Chickasha, and from Chickasha to Fort Sill the next day.
Were they powered vehicles?
They were 4-wheel drive, hard-tired trucks. Solid tires and dirt roads, and if it was dry, we made it easily in 2 days, but it was 2 days of hard, dirty driving. And at my first summer camp, I was an aide to the chemical warfare officer, and one of the interesting things about that, all of the staff officers were mounted on horses that were really put to pasture out at Fort Sill, had been staff mounts prior to their aging, and when we drew them, they were pretty frisky and hadn't been ridden for a while. And as a private, it was my job to sort of warm up the horse and kind of take the sharp edges off of him before my staff officer rode him in the review. We only had one instance, to my knowledge, where one officer fell off his horse right in front of the review stand and broke his arm, but other than that, I think everything went quite smoothly. The following times, of course, most of our active duty or duty times during home station was drilling and study of military tactics and so forth, but our summer camp was the main activity, and very little equipment was issued to any of the units at this time, and we had to draw most of our material and equipment from Fort Sill. We drew mules, horses for animals to pull the caissons and the field artillery, and we did have a few motor vehicles, but very few. And I was assigned as the officer, or not officer at that time, I was still an enlisted man, in charge of the gas dump. And I remained as the gas supply party from that time on until about 1937, when I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. I still had that as part of my duties, but when at that time, 1937, they organized what was known then as the Quartermaster Company, or Quartermaster Regiment, and we had a Quartermaster Headquarters Company. I was one of the 3 officers assigned to that. But on the Louisiana Maneuvers in 1940, I think, was one of the highlights of our training prior to active duty. And we also had made a camp a summer camp in 1938 at Camp Bullis, which was a pretty rough one. We didn't pronounce it Bullis, but I won't repeat what we did call it because we were bivouacked out in cactus patches and in thorny bushes. I've never seen so many thorns, and it's easy to
describe that experience.
Well,
It sounds like a good one.
it is a very good one. Of course, it was hot and it was dry, and we didn't have shorts, and we had no air conditioning, and it was a little bit rough, but this was one of the things that made good soldiers, was being rough. We only in supply, which I happened to be at that time, in dividing a beef meat for the kitchens. One method we used was we'd measure off about what we thought was 15, 20 pounds of beef, and it was frozen. We used an axe to cut it with, and the bread was hard, about a 1/4-inch shell around it, round bread. You could throw it, you could sit on it, you could ride on it. It was pretty rough, but you cut the crust off and it was delicious. But it kept it fresh, and these were some of the highlights, I think, of the Bullis maneuver, and the fact that it was a sort of a dusty, hard, dry time. The dust was so fine and it'd go through the finest cloth, and we got sandwiches that were literally and figuratively sandwiches for food. It didn't aid much the taste of coffee either, but it wasn't too bad. Then the Louisiana Maneuvers, I think many stories come out of that. We were involved in a lot of hard rain the summer that we were there. I just recorded 20-some inches of rain in about 48 hours, and some of our field artillery pieces dropped clear down to their axle, and they couldn't be moved. They had to build a corduroy, what was called a corduroy trail out of cut logs and timber. That's right, to pull them across, and they were finally winched them out. I had one truck that was stuck. We had called the engineers, and they brought a tractor up there, and they could pull it out very easily. And before he got through pulling, his tractor was buried about 2/3. He didn't even get my truck halfway out. So we managed to jack it up and finally got it out. But it was one of the chores of our duty. We had field kitchens with, before they installed we were equipped with the gasoline operated kitchens. You'd have to dig a fire pit and build a fire, then put your steel plate over the top of it, and this is where the cooks did their cooking. And during this time, one of the KPs, his job was to take a can and keep the water bailed out of the fire pit so we could cook breakfast. One morning at breakfast, we had...
Was that during your 20-inch rain, or was
That's-
it just that much water?
It was during and right after. And we had one of the cooks in our kitchen. In fact, one morning I woke up and a hog had run through my tent, tore part of the tent down, and the cook was right after him with a meat cleaver, and he wasn't saying very kind words either. And I found out after an investigation that this razorback had come down. He had just finished shelling a whole case of eggs in his bake pan, so he could make square eggs for breakfast. And this hog come, rooted it over, and turned it over. Well, we had pork instead of eggs for breakfast that day. But this was part of the things that hardened the 45th Division, and I think even though it was considerable hardship in many respects, it's these things in training that that made the 45th what it was.
I think so.
It made it necessary for command to improvise, to change their orders in the middle of the stream, so to speak. And all unit commanders and all units, even down to the lowest buck private, had to change their lifestyle, so to speak. And
Don't you think that training period, those saved lives?
There's no question in my mind but what it was basically one of the best things that could have happened to the personnel in the division. Of course, we were involved with other units as well, but our division was we were the ones that we were primarily interested in. Then after we went back to Fort Sill, or I might recall we were called on active duty at Fort Sill, and you may not be knowledgeable about tariff sizes in clothing or not, but it's what
I've heard about them.
Quartermaster sets up as a norm to go by. So many small, and the percentage, the largest percentage in the center, and then it tapers off in the...
That's the way your clothes are
Right.
supplied.
And they're ordered in bulk. Well, the regular Army people during the period of time prior to the war apparently were shorter and were considerably fatter, and their feet weren't quite as big. And when we were called on active duty, my unit had, I was the S4 for the regiment at that time, and we had boys come in that was 6'6" to 6'8", that had 26 to 30 inch waists and about a 36-inch trouser length. Well, there weren't very many of those in supply, and it made it necessary sometimes for some of the troops in some of the units to stand inspection in civilian clothes and cowboy boots. And it wasn't very military-like, but it was one of the necessities, and it was necessary for the...
How did you eventually meet that? Were they ordered or made?
Special order, and it was finally righted by the time we were moved on down to Barclay. But it took 2 or 3 months in some instances to get some of the men outfitted. But it made it necessary for the quartermaster, Army quartermaster, to change the tariff sizes to fit the new recruits coming in.
Well, shoe sizes was the thing that
And shoe sizes had to be enlarged considerably, and we had one man that I had to go down to Sears and Roebuck and get some children's boots for, because he was a Mexican lad, he had such small feet. But we had one fellow that it was about 3 months before we could get shoes for him, because his feet were so large.
We're about a 12 or 13, I guess.
No, it was a 16.
Oh.
Size 16, if you can imagine. So these are some of the interesting things. One of the things that
There were all problems, though, that had to be coped with.
This is true.
And that makes it a matter of history.
We, being National Guard and having had very little equipment, but we were required to keep all we had and keep records on it. And the division at that time was comprised of Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And when we were called on active duty, of course, these out-of-state units came in to Oklahoma. And some of those people brought harness with them, and some of the impedimenta used in horse-drawn equipment. And all of this had to be assembled and turned in, and being the supply officer for the regiment, it was my job to do that, in addition to requisitioning, ordering all the new clothing to equip new men that come in, and the Allied problems there, and the rations and the fuel. We had stoves that burned coal and wood, and that had to be obtained and delivered, and it was rather a trying time, but I look back on it with considerable pleasure, the fact that I had an opportunity to be involved in it. It was tremendous training.
You learned things there that you didn't get in school or university.
There's no way, and there's no way you could get these things out of the book. Then we were moved to Camp Barkley, and I was assigned to go down on the advanced detachment to prepare, get the quartermaster's supplies and the kitchens and all prepared to receive the rest of the troops. And we had our normal training down there. We got down a little bit earlier than they didn't have the camp quite ready for us, and we had the chores and the ordeal of going through there. And the biggest ordeal that I can recall was what we called the Jones Farm. It was a cloud of dust that went south one day and come back north the next day. And every morning you'd wake up and there's about a quarter of an inch of dust on your tent. We had some of the boys complaining they had to shoo the gophers off the top of their tent so they could get in.
Where is Camp Barkley?
That's Abilene, Texas.
Oh, is that Barkley?
That's right.
It's been renamed since
Out west of, I think it's been inactivated. There is an airfield just out
I'm
east of
familiar
town.
with that,
But
but I had forgotten it was Barkley.
the Camp Barkley as such has been inactivated and I think returned to farming.
It's
faci-
But I know what you mean about the dust and the sand out there.
Well, it too was part of our training, and we learned quite a few things. Then in 1942, the division was triangulized, and
Excuse me just a minute. Okay.
when the division was triangulized, I was a company commander of the 145th, or the Company D of the 45th QM Regiment, which was then redesignated to 145th QM Truck Company Reserve. At this time, they were making every effort to make the 45th Division an all-Oklahoma division, and many of the out-of-state units were separated from the division in the reorganization. I was then,
What time was this?
that was in the spring of 1942, in about March. And I left after shipping or helping transport the 45th Division to the shipping areas where they were to be shipped out to Fort Devens. I was packed up and we were sent to port of embarkation for the CBI Theater, my truck company. Then that was in March of 42. Then on reorganization of the 45th after World War II, and in 1947, I was assigned as executive officer to the division quartermaster. Then we had the various difficulties in reorganization, which is not normal, and it seemed like about every time we got things the way we thought it should be, then they reorganized again, and we were in the process of getting it was a chore, and it had its problems. We had our training program. Most of our training was done at Fort Hood during the summer camp, and we were quite well equipped. And being the executive officer to the quartermaster, is always a quartermaster's responsibility to go down on the advanced detail to get the campsite checked over, the kitchens checked out, and all the supplies ready to issue to the division.
Were you still a lieutenant?
No, I was a major at that
Tell
time.
us about that.
Well, after I got to the CBI Theater, I was promoted to a captain, then from there to a major, and was a major at the time. I was executive officer to the Division
So
Quartermaster.
it was Major Rey then?
At that time, yes. And then when we were called on active duty to go to Louisiana in 1950, I had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and was a division quartermaster at that time. Of course, as usual, the quartermaster had to go down on the advance to get the campsite ready. The administrative personnel, the civilian personnel at Camp Polk, what it was at that time, it was not known as Fort Polk, but at Camp Polk, were not organized, and my company, the 45th Division Quartermaster Company, had a laundry section in it. We had a quartermaster clothing section. We had the ration section, and my detail got unquestionable wonderful training in aiding the post setting up their facilities in these areas. Our personnel helped operate the clothing issued to the various supply people in the division. Our laundry people helped them set up the post laundry and get the laundry activities operative, where our ration breakdown section had to train and help train the post ration breakdown people in the ration activity. And I think this was true in some of the other branches of service. We were busy enough in quartermaster. I didn't have too much time to see what went on in the engineering and signal field, but I'm sure they had equal problems. But once we were alerted to go then to Japan, this was in 1951, spring of 1951. However, we might digress just a bit. One of the interesting things at Fort Polk was an ice storm we had during the winter of 1950. The coldest it had been down there in their recent history. They'd never had so much ice. The pine trees, I think some of them are still bent over from the weight of the ice. The gas lines, having their moisture in them for some reason, froze, so we lost our gas to the camp. The electric lines, the wire tensile strength on the wires, it was explained, was not designed to handle the weight of ice because it never had ice down there. So as a result,
What year was that?
that was 1950. The electric wires fell, and so did the telephone wires. So we were out of communication with the outside world from other than through radio. So this put an extra burden, a good training thing on the signal in their radio and so forth. And our kitchen personnel had to do a little improvising in order to get meals, and the quartermaster had to be sure that everybody had an overcoat. So it was another one of those. Oh yes, they had. We had all of the equipment, but some of the sizes were not exactly what they should have been, and we had to do some adjusting. And
That was characteristic.
this was very characteristic, and it was another part of training which I thought was might be of some interest. Then in the spring of 1951, I went with the advanced detachment staff to Hokkaido, Japan, where we had to sign for and prepare the campsites for the incoming division. Mm-hmm. We were there about a month ahead of time, and it was a little difficult. The Japanese troops had been using the kitchens in some of the areas that we took over, and they're quite lovers of fish, and the odor of fish in the ice boxes was pretty hard to get rid of. Soda and everything else didn't seem to do much good, and some of it still lingered by the time our troops got there, but it was another interesting experience. The division was divided in half, and one half of the division was moved to a town called Chitose, which was an airfield about 50, 75 miles from Hokkaido, where the division headquarters was. The campsite was covered with 2 or 3 feet of snow when we got there, and that all had to be bulldozed off in order to get the camp set up, the tentage set up, the stoves installed, and the cots and blankets and everything distributed to the area prior to the time the division come in. And the fact that some people changed their mind 2 or 3 times as to the location of some of the tent areas, it put a pretty close squeak on getting everything distributed and set up in time to...
You work with deadlines.
That is so true. We had one interesting thing. Our people, being from the West, are not great lovers of mutton, and the quartermaster has a certain schedule, and it come our day to have mutton the day one of the ships came in, and we had a big mess hall set up for feeding the incoming troops, and we, of course, were quite anxious to give them a good welcome. We had reconstituted milk, which was done there on the post, and an excellent job, incidentally. And so my food service officer, I told him we had a problem, and told him we had mutton on the menu for that day, and he said, well, I think maybe I can take care of it for you, Colonel. So he took all the meat off and ground it up and put onions and some garlic and made mutton burgers of it. And the G2 and I was down, and it smelled so good while it was cooking, and he had to have one that tasted. And he had got about halfway through it. He says, hey, Bruce, this is real good. I said, what is it? And I said, well, you won't believe it. I said, those are mutton brood. And he threw it in the wastebasket. He said, I thought I didn't like this. But that was Woody Cook, incidentally, that he was a...
I couldn't get my husband to eat salmon or anything like that because he called it goldfish.
Oh.
And he had just had it in the Army until he was full up with it.
Well, the quartermaster, of course, got the blame for all of the mutton, but
I imagine, what were some of your common complaints?
Well, they wouldn't even taste it, you know.
Yeah.
They just didn't like mutton, and they wouldn't even taste it. You know, we had a story there that
preconceived ideas.
the reason why the Army got so much mutton is because the Air Force had to have these fleece-lined jackets, and they had to do something with the meat with it.
Now, is that real?
Oh, why, sure, that's the truth. And then on Thanksgiving Day in 1951, I again was on the advance detachment staff to go to Korea to prepare for the movement of the division into Korea. We were relieving the 1st Cavalry Division, and it was necessary to check the equipment and supplies and get prepared for the movement and entrance of the 45th into Korea. This was accomplished in the fall, or before snow started to fall, and I established a railhead then at a town 25 miles north of the 38th parallel, which was in Tagwanee, a little bombed out ceramics town, and all that was left there was 2 poplar trees and some pieces of old crockery, and the rail line came through right through the base of that, and this is where we set up our division supply dump. And as the division quartermaster, I still had the responsibility of feeding the division, but I don't believe that there has ever been troops that have been so well equipped as the 45th, and I'm sure others across the whole area had been, but nowhere in history has it been recorded where every foxhole was lined with an air mattress, and we had, I even served them 2 servings of ice cream a week up in the foxholes, and we had showers.
How
right.
Did you do that?
Well, it was supposed to be Army's responsibility, but they didn't want to come that far up, and so they moved the equipment up to us, and we made the ice cream and froze it and sent it up in Meramite cans, which is part of the food container packs, and we're able to keep it frozen clear till the time of consumption. So I remember the Thanksgiving of, no, I guess it was Christmas of '51. We issued out of our headquarters there, or out of our division quartermaster supply, 23 tons of frozen turkey. That's just the turkey alone. They shipped in from Formosa some bananas for us. We had apples, we had oranges, we had nuts. We had everything that you could expect to have, and no one anywhere in the history of military has been so well taken care of as we were there. And
No wonder the 45th Division remembers that so kindly.
well, I'm proud that I had a part to play in it. Though it was small, it was one of the keys, I think, to the success of the 45th Division.
The Army moves on its stomach, so you have to take pretty good care of your men.
Well, if they didn't get enough to eat, it was their own fault.
Okay.
On returning to the United States after our tour in Korea, the reorganization of the 45th Division in 1952, I was appointed as G-4 chief as a staff officer to the division commander, and remained the G-4 supply officer until retirement. I had
How long were you in there?
29 and a half years active duty and reserve and National Guard time, and 29 and a half years of very memorable occasions of.
You saw a lot develop during that time.
I saw a tremendous amount, and one of my more interesting duties in the military, which was not with the 45th, but I spent 6 months in India and 2.5 years in China on the Burma Road with General Stilwell.
You said be sure to get that.
And I was initially sent over for as a transportation advisor to the Chinese Army, and some of the things didn't develop that they had planned when the Japanese took over Burma. It cut off our transportation route in, so we needed a supply depot, and I was assigned as a supply depot commander in the western section of China. And there's a lot of stories that could be told about the duty with the Chinese that probably some wouldn't even understand, but one interesting thing that I saw that, and probably people won't believe it either, but I actually saw it. The fact that there were no roads, or practically no roads, the only road we had was the Burma Road. And in order to get their livestock to market, pigs especially, they carried them, and they'd tie them together, tie their feet together and carry them across their shoulders. And between two men, and where they were able to use some roads, I have seen as many as...
Just a minute, this isn't recording. All right, now try.
Where the farmers had transportation available to them, or where there was a road available, they used two-wheeled carts that was drawn by a small horse, and I've seen as many as 8 and 10 hogs that were knocked out on dope and stacked up like cordwood, and when they got to the market, they'd dump them out and take cold water and bring them to. So instead of, their carts weren't big enough, they had no stock trucks or stock beds to put on these carts, and so by knocking them out, and I assume they used opium because they raised a lot of opium poppies there, and they knocked them out and just stack them up, and it's kind of interesting to see a hog with a faraway smile on his face, big haul to market, but and a few other things that I witnessed that probably some wouldn't believe, but actually I saw it. It was interesting to see them build the airfield at Kunming. This was in the spring of '42. Miles of oxen carts, wooden wheels, hauling rocks, big rocks in to lay down and put mud in between them. Then the big rocks in some areas, they had thousands of people with hammers breaking them up, making smaller rocks for the airfield. Mm-hmm. And then they had another group of people, women and old children, with little hammers making gravel to surface the road. I have a Kodak picture of 2,000 men attached to long ropes pulling a huge granite roller that they used to run back and forth across the airfield after they put the what they called metalling. It was the rock and the mud and stuff down on the field. And this, in addition to many other things, I wore out a couple of Jeeps running up and down the Burma Road with my activities, but it was most interesting and beautiful country, and when you get away from town, it had even a nice, sweet, clean odor to it. But it's typical of all of the interior areas. Kunming was a town of, I would say, normally you'd expect to find probably 50 to 100,000 people in it. We had, they claimed there was better than 2 million people there, refugees from all over China that had come into Kunming because of the Japanese had taken over the coastal areas. This was sandwiched between the initial duty with the 45th when we went on active duty in 1940, and also when it was reorganized again in 1945. I am a graduate of the Motor Maintenance School at Norm Oil in San Antonio, Ordnance Maintenance School in Maryland, and the Air Ground Liaison School at Southern Pines, North Carolina. Graduate of Command General Staff College in 1953. Was presented the Bronze Star for exceptional service in the CBI in China, and also the Bronze Star for service in Korea. And I have the Meritorious Award from the Oklahoma State, which was given to me by, well, here we go. I don't even remember who was governor at that time. Well, that would conclude more or less my military service. I am retired now and am back in the nursery business again. Did you want to cover my...
When you enlisted, had you already started a nursery business? Or
Yes.
Your family?
Yes. Do you want to cover this?
Yes. Mm-hmm. All right. Now then, since we're starting in on Mr. Rey's life story, other than the military, would you give us the name of your father and your mother and spell her maiden name out for us, please?
My father was William Rey, and his name was spelled R-E-Y also.
Yes.
And my mother's name was Maggie Rey, and they both came to Oklahoma in 1889. They, of course, weren't married at the time, but my father made the run in 1889 and established the nursery at 5300 Belle Isle, which was out in the country at that time, in 1907. And I was born at the nursery there in 1908. And the Belle Isle Lake, at the time my father established the nursery, had just been finished and wasn't even filled with water yet. And it was developed into the only recreational park in the Southwest at the time.
That was quite the thing to do, though, was to be seen boating on the...
It was a very popular place at the time by people from all over the state. One thing that I can look back in with pride is that I think my father has more monuments to his activities. He was responsible for planting most of the big trees in the heritage area in the older part of Oklahoma City and arranging the street trees in the biggest part of Oklahoma City at that time.
Now, did he grow those from seedlings, or did he order those and bring them in?
Some he grew, some he grafted, but most of them were ordered in from other sources, and he delivered and planted them.
Did he find problems in adapting some of the plants to this area?
You'll find problems in adapting plants anywhere. We find, however, that plants are able to adapt more than we had originally thought for. I know when I was in school at Stillwater, it seems like it was back in 1492, but this was 1926, 7, and 8. But we were told then in the School of Horticulture that you couldn't grow magnolias this far north, but they have some of the prettiest magnolias in the campus at OSU now that you'll find anywhere in the state. So we find that they are adaptable just like other things are.
Yeah.
But it has been most interesting to me to be involved in an industry that is dedicated to beautification and making a town, making the homes a more graceful place to live and a more desirable and pleasant place to live.
Are you on the Beautification Committee for Oklahoma?
I've been on the Beautification Committee, the Chambers of Commerce, and also with worked with the Oklahoma City Beautiful. I'm not a member now. Since I retired from the nursery business, I've tried to get away from a few things that have tied me down, and I may go back later, but I'm well acquainted with their activities, and they're doing a tremendous job, and I am most happy to have had affiliation with them and worked with them.
I thought the Rey Nursery was still...
The Rey Nursery, as such, has ceased to exist. However, my name still remains with the company. The man that bought me out is a graduate of OSU and is a very capable and personable individual.
But it is really your family then?
That's correct, yes. Mm-hmm. It is not my family now. There's no relationship with it.
Whom did you marry, Mr. Rey?
Adelpha Boer, and she was born at down by Lawton in the Comanche County, and I met her in high school, and we courted during high school romance, and it's still a romance. And this has been about 48 years ago. Mm-hmm.
And any children?
Yes, I have 2 children. I have a daughter that lives in Guyman. I have 3 beautiful granddaughters, and a son, Bill Rey, that lives here in town, and he's an electronic engineer.
Mm-hmm. And, we like to keep these connected because of the genealogy.
Oh, well, he is engaged in a most interesting project here in town. He designs and installs the heart monitoring machines to the various little clinics over the state.
Oh,
and they are piped in by telephone to the larger hospitals who are able to monitor, and it's been responsible for saving many, many lives so far in the cardiovascular field.
Really has.
And he's very interested in electronics as it applies to medicine, and could care less about the nursery business, so this is why I sold the business. And, but I do
Well, he
conduct
certainly is in a useful field, though.
very. We feel like that, and we're most proud of it. I am engaged in a very interesting thing at the present time. I have been for the last 5 years. I conduct a class in horticulture, landscaping, and gardening at the continuing education down at St. Luke's on Fridays.
Oh.
And I'm also on the advisory committee on the care and maintenance of the yard at the Heritage House on 401
Beautiful.
on North Robinson. I was on the curricula committee when this new extension school, OSU school out on 10th Technological School and 10th in Portland, when they set up their curricula for the school there. Was also on the curricula committee that on the agricultural school in Tahlequah when that was set up. I'm a past president of the Oklahoma State Nursery Association and the Oklahoma City Nursery Association, and I'm a past president of the Northside Rotary Club, and have been involved in several of the civic operations, and was working with the Boy Scouts. I believe it was last year when they planted the all of the 1776 redbud trees out on the and that I'm looking forward to the time when they unearthed the capsule on the year 2000. And it was one of Stanley Draper's dreams, and there was a man that had tremendous foresight for Oklahoma City. I've heard it described that the only difference between the progress in Tulsa and Oklahoma City, Tulsa has made many, many strides, but the only reason why Tulsa couldn't keep up with Oklahoma City is because Oklahoma City had Stanley Draper.
I've heard that. Could you tell us just a little bit about your school days?
Well, when I was in...
You mentioned that at OSU.
I can start from grade school. I went to grade school out here at 63rd and Western when it was in Oklahoma County. And you go through the 8th grade, and then you had to take a county examination to see whether you were able to go on into the city schools to high school.
I see.
And Classen High School was a junior high school at that time, and I went there 1 year, and then was transferred to Central High School, which was the only senior high school in Oklahoma City. And our class...
And what year was that?
That was in 1923, and I graduated in 1926, and our class was so large that there was not enough caps and gowns in Oklahoma City to supply all of the seniors, and there was no hall big enough to accommodate them, and they took us out to the Coliseum out at the stockyards, and this is where we graduated. There was 660 some graduates at the time, and the next year, of course, I went on to what was then Oklahoma A&M, and it was a good 3/4 of a day travel from Oklahoma City to Oklahoma A&M at the time. There was dirt roads, there's paved roads as far as Guthrie, and then it was dirt from there on over, and either go through Coyle or go on up and come across from another little town. They finally got some gravel into the Stillwater. It's interesting to see the changes of what it was when I went to school there and what it is now. Where the library is used to be right in the middle of the highway.
That's right.
And the buildings that was way out at the edge of school now is right in the middle of the campus.
Their curricula, too, has expanded so.
Oh my, it's tremendous. They have so many more complete courses out
Than
there.
we have.
One of the quarrels that I have with the school at the time, in order to get horticulture and floriculture and what I wanted, I had to enroll in the School of Agriculture, of course. And in the School of Agriculture, it was necessary to take animal husbandry, and I could care less whether a skin on a sheep was pink or whether one hog dressed out more than another, but I had to take all of that to
Just
get.
think how you used that later on, though, in your Army career.
It helped me know which part of the cow to cut off.
Right. You were well acquainted with it, and judging your meats and things like that. You were expert at it then.
You never know experiences that you have, what you may need them for later on down the line. I think maybe it's part of a design already set out ahead of
It
them.
must be. There's something, because you generally use that knowledge somewhere.
Well, this is what has, I think our values are, each one has their own values, and so many put their values in money, but frankly, I try to place my values elsewhere, that satisfaction and happiness to
What
me
you're doing is one thing.
in what one does, and I think you have to decide what you like to do and then be the best there is in that field, or best you can do in that field. And this is why I am most happy doing what I'm doing. I'm in the advisory business or consulting business now, and I don't have to worry with labor as far as that part of it, but I can be happy with what I'm doing. And in this school down at St. Luke's, I'm attempting to cause people to see more of what they're looking at, if you know what I mean. The more you know about a subject, the more you can see in it, the more you can appreciate it, the more you can get out of it. And if it makes an impression on you, you can pass it on to somebody else. And this is why I like the horticulture business. Actually, what we were doing, we were painting pictures with plants instead of paint.
Right.
And
Did your father regard it that way too?
oh yes, he was a lover of plants and nature, and he couldn't. The days just wasn't long enough for him, and he loved every bit of it. And you'd have to have just a horse and buggy for transportation way out at the edge of town. I can recall his working till midnight to get his supplies all ready, his wagon loaded, and he'd start out before daylight in the morning to get downtown in time to put in a day's work. And by the time he got loaded up and back home again, it was after dark, and many times as a kid we were already in bed by the time he got home. So you'd have to love a business in order to do it that way. But
Well, from the run that he made, did he stake a claim?
he staked a claim, but he was too young to keep it, and some older people took it away from him.
Oh, that's.
But my grandfather was a gunsmith, and the Rey is from Switzerland, Swiss derivative. It's possible that some Spaniard might have gotten over in Switzerland sometime or another, because R-E-Y is a Spanish name. But my father, when he was young, before they got married, hunted quail and rabbits and plover, which he said was very plentiful at that time for the market. They made their own shells and everything. I wish I had a tape of some of the stories that he told of the early days here in Oklahoma City. He tells of wagons, big freight wagons, being stuck hub deep on Main Street down here in Oklahoma City before it'd take 8 to 10 mules to pull them out.
We have record and even some early photographs of that mud, how deep it got.
Well, it's difficult to equate these stories with our present downtown Oklahoma City, isn't it?
That's correct. It is. We've come a far piece, but to be a young state.
It's been interesting to me in the short time that I've been in this city and state. I've been here now some 68 years, and I can recall when Western was paved to 36th Street, and the Oklahoma City Golf and Country Club is where Crown Heights is at the present time, and from there on north was practically all country, and Western was a road, or it was traversable by a vehicle to 50th Street, and from there on north to 63rd Street wasn't much more than just a cow trail. Mm-hmm. And all of the road came by the travel came by the nursery there on Belle Isle Avenue, and
It was a wonderful location.
it certainly was. And the wagons and buggies and occasional one-lung old-style automobile. I know our first truck was a truck that had the engine under the seat and the crank on the side and no top on it. It didn't even have lights. Then the next vehicle we got had carbide lights on it. You'd have to get out, start the carbide up and light them with a match, and the side lamps were coal oil lamps on either side of the vehicle.
We went in for variety.
And well, that was the style at the time.
Yes.
In the vehicles.
That was a new invention.
Oh, you bet. You couldn't see with them, would you? You could tell that it was there.
Well, what do you think now in the beautification of Oklahoma City? What do you think is our best future development in that?
You mean in the present construction?
More trees
Oh, by all means, more trees, and I think we should plant more flowering trees, and less trees that just make a big tree and no production. There's many trees. You go in an area where there are no trees at all. The first thing you want to do, of course, is to get a tree out there and get a little shade.
Was that how they got the elm trees that became diseased later?
Right.
It was so costly.
So much of it, we were after shade, and the elm was by far the best tree, and it was one of the faster trees. Especially
well, at that time, the elm disease hadn't come ever in this area. It'd never been known.
There's nothing prettier than a beautiful elm, and
They
even when it's naked with no leaves.
Nichols, used them
right.
all up and down.
Now those Chinese elm, what he used out in there,
Yes.
are a fast-growing tree. But they're gone now, or practically so. But I think we need to think in terms of the future when you plant a tree, because it lives much longer than man, and something that would give a bonus, either flowers in the spring or color in the fall or both. Mm-hmm. And there are so many that if properly planted, can add so much more to the actual beauty of the town, mm-hmm. rather than just to plant something that will make a shade. And this is what knowledge and what the Oklahoma City Beautiful is trying to do. Mm-hmm. This is what the profession is trying to do, is to educate the public in developing in desires in this area. Mm-hmm. It's difficult sometimes, and this is why what I'm in hopes of doing is, in my little classes down at St. Luke's, is to impart some of this information to some of the people, where it creates a desire to have this added beauty in Oklahoma City. And I have great respect for Governor Bellman. When he took office, he attempted to get 1 million trees planted in Oklahoma every year. He tried. He started on that program. And of course,
well, they have been so beneficial in drought countries too.
Oh yes.
That somehow they give off enough moisture or something that our dust bowl is not what it used to be.
Well, it's sort of like some of the people that were complaining about the program of planting 1 million trees, well, half of them would die if you planted that many, but 500,000 trees every year is a pretty good, it would help. There's no question but what all you have to do in the summertime is to drive down in the heritage area where all those big trees are, and it's a minimum of 10 degrees cooler in that area than it is out where there's no other. Trees and lawn in the average person's yard will produce enough pure oxygen to support the family that lives there. And your tree not only gives off trees and flowers and shrubbery, plant life, gives off pure oxygen. It also sweeps a lot of the impurities out of the air. Environmental air control. It also cuts down on noise pollution or noise control. It's one of the best noise cushioners to shut off noise from highways and excessive highways. It's acoustical, one of nature's acoustical devices. It's also a nice air conditioner. You can, the moisture that is evaporated through the leaves.
I remember hearing that discussed in stopping the dust from rolling, so
right.
That the planting of trees.
We were involved in the Shelter Belt project during the Roosevelt administration. The proclamation, and we furnished the first trees to go out of our nursery to go on the Shelter Belt project out in the western part of the state. And my brother at that time was with the Department of Agriculture out of Washington and was helping select and work out the contracts for the shelter belts with the farmers in the western part of the state.
That's been a wonderful help.
My father had the contract for doing the landscaping in the Capitol building when it was first established, and I was just a kid at the time, and I helped plant the grass, the first lawn in the state capitol out here. That's right.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we also helped work through the Oklahoma City Flower Club people, planted trees on either side of the highway from the Capitol to Edmond. There's one or two of those still left, but most of them have been since torn down due to progress. But these are projects that it's been real nice to work with and work through, and the development and
well, I can't think of anything that would make you longer remembered than
well,
to have those beautiful avenues of trees.
I'm proud that I have a number of monuments in the way of trees, even including some of the...
You and your father both.
Right. One of the projects down at the Urban Renewal, that was one of the last jobs I did before I sold business.
But our tape's about out. But thank you so much, Mr. Rey. I didn't know too much about your military, but I have known about your civic, many civic things and help that you've been in Oklahoma City. The people whom I talked to, the first thing they'd mention would be your civic mindedness in the things that you have helped to do here. We thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. You can't expect people to live in a place that you don't want to live in.
Right, that's
And
true.
I'm selfish enough to want to have a beautiful place to come back to.
Not only that, but you've received a wonderful heritage from your father, who evidently had the dream of these things in his mind, and you helped carry it out. And it's now you're seeing the fruition of the things that your father began and that you had a part in.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rey, for coming to us. We appreciate it. We did, Mr. Rey, and thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.